Hola, bona tarda, benvinguts i benvingudes a
Hello and good afternoon, and
una
welcome to the
sessió
online
on
conference
comptarem amb Raquel
Diet and
Bernácer,
Female Health
dietista nutricionista
with Raquel
i
Bernácer,
també experta en
nutritionist
alimentació en la
and
menopausa. I bé,
menopause diet
faré una
expert.
miqueta una introducció sobre Fundesplai.
Just to give you a brief
A
introduction
Fundesplai treballem una mica
about
per conscienciar i animar
Fundesplai,
a les persones
we
a
work
fer front als reptes socials,
on everything that has to do
climàtics que se'ns
with
presenten.
social,
I bé,
climate,
per aquest
and
motiu doncs,
other
organitzem
challenges that
diverses
people face.
activitats,
To do so, we hold a number of activities,
d'educació no formals, en esplais, en escoles,
informal education,
i llavors també
in children's
estem,
groups at schools. So
formant molt
we are working a lot
alimentació saludable i
to
sostenible.
train people
I
in
de fet, des de fa ja
healthy
4
diets,
anys tenim una exposició
and we even have an
muntada
exhibition
a la seu de
underway
Fundesplai,
at the
ubicada al Prat de
Fundesplai
Llobregat,
headquarters in El Prat de Llobregat.
Impacte. I bé, us compartirem tot seguit un vídeo perquè
Along those lines,
conegueu una miqueta més aquesta exposició
and you will see a video
així també us animem
that gives a bit more detail on that, and we encourage you to come visit us. Come discover how we can change the world by eating. Eat, act, impact.
Doncs bé, esperem que tingueu ganes de venir després
So we hope that has encouraged you to come visit us
us hi convidem.
after seeing that video.
També, si volguéssiu
And
saber més detalls,
if you'd like to know more,
web oficial,
you can visit our
I bé, més
official website,
més cosetes. La conferència
Fundesplai.cat.
s'emmarca dins el projecte
Today's
i
presentation
que forma
is part of the EcoLife program, also part of the EU program. And the eLife program is meant to contribute to the goals of the European Green Pact, especially from the farm to table area. We want to reduce the carbon footprint of foodstuffs, guarantee dietary health and food security for everyone. In a word, to guarantee a fairer, honorable, more honorable, and sustainable food system. As part of that, it's very important that you give us an evaluation after this activity. We will be providing some questionnaires in Catalan and Spanish. You can answer in whatever language you feel most comfortable in. And you can also ask Raquel, our speaker, questions. And just to conclude this introduction, let me introduce Raquel to you, dietitian, nutritionist, and expert, as well as an educator, specialized in vegetable-based diets and the hormonal health of women. She will help us to handle a healthier, more fulfilling menopause. Author of Mondays Without Meat and many other books. Raquel, welcome, and thanks for being with us this afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Whenever you're ready, you have the floor. Thank you. I think you'll be showing my presentation, and we can get underway. Well, after that wonderful introduction, I'd like to thank Fundesplai for their invitation and all of you who are joining us online or who may be watching this later on. Today, the idea is to talk about diet and female health. It's a topic that began to interest me personally as I began to realize I was getting to an age in which, well, not much is said about that age, about menopause, about how to take care of oneself at that age. And that is when I began to specialize in it and discover it, which is so important to all of us. Today, the idea behind my presentation, I have structured it into three main blocks. One, an introduction into women's health, very briefly, just to set the context. And then two other areas that I'm going to focus on: women's health in childbearing age. We'll discuss the different physiological situations that we may find there. And then the climaterium, that entire process of progressing towards menopause when women go from childbearing to non-childbearing states. Just to begin and to establish the context, let me begin with this statement. Intrauterine malnutrition doesn't only lead to lower weight or less healthy babies, but it has an impact on the appearance of chronic non-communicable diseases in the adult age. What does this have to do with women's health? A great deal. What it's telling us is that within the area of nutrition and something that we've been studying for many years is how a mother's diet has an impact on her baby during pregnancy. And the fact that it's male or female baby is another thing, but this is about the woman's health. It's important that women's health be taken into account as of the time of fertilization and then gestation. We'll see how the development of the woman to an adult age will be greatly influenced by her nutrition and her diet, chosen by her parents, her mother and father. Therefore, it's important when it comes to thinking of having children and becoming pregnant, the lifestyle of the parents must be as healthy as possible to make things easier for that future human being. As we move on into childbearing age women's diets, we're talking about the woman as of the time she becomes a childbearing woman. So I will skip childhood and those stages, the infantile years. There aren't many differences then. The main differences in nutritional requirements become more specific as of the time in which a girl becomes a woman. This may sound like an old-fashioned concept, but as of menarche, as of when the first menstruation, the first period appears, and a young girl begins to be a childbearing age female, and her nutritional needs change. It's important to remember that adolescence is a nutritionally vulnerable period because an entire series of biological and psychosocial changes occur that take us from a childhood to an adult age. Many hormonal changes take place. And at this time, nutritional requirements increase. It's a very fast development period. In this period, dietary factors, physical activity factors, and diet and nutritional factors are very important. And they are more and more important as these adolescents are developing into adult women. And especially in the world we live in today, with so much influence from social media, it's important to pay attention to how our adolescents are living through this change period and try to meet their dietary needs. In this stage, eating disorders can appear, such as anorexia, such as bulimia, compulsive eating, binge eating. Therefore, it's very important to pay close attention to how these females are developing at this time, these young women. And another thing that occurs in this period of adolescence is the menarche, the appearance of menarche. That's the technical term for the first menstruation. Let me briefly explain this because the menstrual cycle is very complex. Many hormones come into play, but I would like to give you a brief explanation because I've realized as I begin to work with women, even though we are adult age and even getting close to menopause, we still don't understand our menstrual cycle. And it's very important that we do understand it. It tells us a great deal about our health status. Relatively recently, the WHO determined that the menstrual cycle was the fifth vital sign, such as breathing and heart rate and all of that. Now, it's very important that women have a healthy menstrual cycle. The first thing we must know is that the menstrual cycle begins on the first day of our period. The first day there's bleeding, that's day 1. And there we see it up at the top of this circle in the period, the position of 12 o'clock. Traditionally, it's been said that the cycle lasts 28 days, but it can even last up to 35 days and still be healthy. And it could be a shorter cycle of 25 or 26 days. In this case, I'm showing you a 28-day cycle because it's very practical and easy to explain. But it's important that we know that the first day of the cycle is the first day of bleeding, that the days of staining, of bleeding, that can last 5, 6, or 7 days. And then the different phases appear, the proliferative phase, the ovulation phase, and the secretion phase. I don't know if I've made it clearer with this slide, but here we do see the complexity of what is occurring during this 25, 30 to 30 days, to 35 days, excuse me, in which the two phases are very clear. The follicular phase from day 1 to 14, and the luteal phase from day 14 to 28 or 29. Day 14 would be the day of ovulation. What is occurring here? In the first phase, the follicular phase, there are a number of hormones that begin to increase, others that don't appear until the luteal phase. What occurs in this phase is that estrogen begins to increase. That estrogen begins to increase until day 14. It stimulates the production or maturation of different follicles in the ovary. That is, follicles are potential ova, and they begin to mature from day 10 to day 12. And then on day 14, there is one egg, one follicle, that is, that releases the mature egg, ovocyte. That is the day of ovulation. And in parallel, what occurs in the uterus from day 1 to day 7, menstruation, that bleeding, the descaling of the internal wall of the uterus. And once that has happened, estrogen begins to increase, and then it begins to form. It's as if it was forming a bed inside the uterus, the endometrium, and the wall of the endometrium begins to thicken. The wall of the endometrium is the inner layer of the uterus. It begins to thicken, and following ovulation, that layer begins to thicken. And so if there hasn't been fertilization, you can see here at the end, all of the hormones decrease. That is the signal. All of our hormones go down to practically zero, to the minimal level. That is the signal that triggers menstruation. Therefore, this repeats every cycle, 28 or some approximate number of days from the first menstruation until menopause. And we could give a whole presentation just about this, but I won't go into more detail. But it's important to understand the two phases and how these hormones also cause our body to feel differently in different times according to the menstrual cycle. But again, I don't have time to go into detail on that today. What happens to women in childbearing age? she has a number of nutritional needs, very specific needs, because of this condition of the menstrual cycle. Importantly, it's important to maintain a proper weight for your physical makeup and a proper intake of nutrients. Here's a list of some very important ones that can condition a woman's health and even the health of her future baby if she gets pregnant. One is folic acid or vitamin B9. It's very important to get sufficient intake of folic acid before you become pregnant and also during pregnancy. Once you're pregnant, there are many supplements that you can take, but it's important to have a vegetable-rich diet where you will find a lot of B9. That's very important in general. Our diet is not rich in vegetables. Therefore, we may be in situations in which our B9 intake is too low. If you are going to plan a pregnancy, it's very important to take your diet into account. And if you're not getting enough B9, begin taking supplements even before you get pregnant. As for calcium, the woman should stockpile, if you will, this mineral throughout her entire childbearing period, because in menopause, decalcification is very common, and there's a risk of osteoporosis once you begin menopause. And in fact, in the last phases of life, old age, the fractures are among the leading causes of death for women. It's very important to take calcium into account, therefore. Vitamin D, very much related with bone metabolism. You need to get sun, and if you don't get enough vitamin D, again, to take supplements under the guidance of a professional. Of course, we also need a sufficient intake of iron, also because of menstrual losses. Women tend to lose some women lose a lot of blood, and it's very important to have an iron-rich diet. I'll show you some details about what kinds of foods that could be: vitamin C, vitamin B12, zinc, selenium, and proteins, in addition to the other nutrients, of course. But these are the ones that are especially relevant for this life phase. What about general recommendations for women in childbearing age? Very important to have a varied diet, as long as they are locally produced, seasonal, rich in fiber, legumes, cereals, whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. It's important to get good quality proteins, lean meat. If you are not a vegetarian, lean pork, poultry, fish, eggs, legumes, and derivatives such as tofu, tempeh, and nuts. Also, healthy fats, and this would include things like olive oil, seeds, and avocados. To reduce ultra-processed foods and sugar as much as possible. To eat as little of these kinds of foods as possible. If you can stop eating them altogether, all the better. And also limit your intake of alcohol. To eat or to have drinks with no calories, such as water, tea, coffee, sugar-free infusions, and to be physically active and get plenty of exercise. What about pregnancy and breastfeeding? Here, some very special physiological changes take place for women, and their nutritional needs increase. But that does not mean that you have to eat for two. That is a legend. You don't have to eat for two. You do have to pay attention to certain nutrients, which, as I said, these requirements do increase. And so it's important, and I always advise my clients, once you get pregnant, to visit a nutritionist to get recommendations and some proper guidelines, and continue to visit them at least a couple times during pregnancy to make sure you are on the right diet and getting enough of all the necessary nutrients. It's also important to remember that you can get supplements of nutrients. If you have to take supplements, then so be it. But that does not mean that you should overlook a healthy diet just because you're taking folic acid and iodine, for example, during pregnancy. If you notice, these things are very similar. These nutrients are very similar to what I mentioned earlier: folic acid, iodine, iron, calcium, zinc, magnesium, potassium, and certain other minerals. As I said, it's very important to have those checkups during pregnancy as to how your diet is going, because a good diet during pregnancy is the best preparation for breastfeeding. During breastfeeding, the woman's nutritional requirements continue to increase to produce milk. As long as we're able to, it's recommended that we do breastfeed, as it has a number of benefits for the baby and also for the mother: protection against disease, reduction of costs associated with the baby's health care, reduce obesity risk for the child, and reduced risk of ovarian cancer or breast cancer for the mother. If that's not possible, if breastfeeding is not possible, there are formulas which are very well suited for the development of babies. Now we'll discuss a bit about climaterium. We'll discuss the stage in which a woman begins to stop being fertile, and we'll look at what happens with her hormones and her health in that period. It's very important to be aware of all of this. I don't know if you can see this graph very well, but just to clarify a few concepts, in different concepts when it comes to menopause, menopause is the date of a woman's last menstruation. We can only know what the last menstruation was looking back, so to speak. We consider menopause to be the last menstruation from 12 months of perspective, that is, looking back on the last year. A woman can begin to have misadjustments in her menstruation. She can miss her period 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and then 6 months, and even have this irregularity for a few years of having or not having a menstrual cycle. It's important to remember one thing: menopause is the last period, but we'll only know it was the last period when 12 months have passed without a period. Everything that occurs before that is considered premenopause or perimenopause. That period tends to begin around 40 years of age. They tell us that we can begin to have perimenopausal symptoms as of age 40. This occurs with many women. The most common form this takes are irregularities in her cycle, shorter cycles. A woman who had a 30-day cycle now has 28 or 25-day or 26-day cycles, shorter cycles. They realize it when in the same month she's had her period twice, because the number of days has been reduced. Those tend to be the first symptoms of beginning this hormonal misadjustment. Once a woman has had menopause, she begins post-menopause, all those years in which the woman no longer has menstruation. Climaterium is understood to be the entire process that begins with premenopause until post-menopause, from age 45 to age 70, for example, when it's considered that a woman begins elderly age or the third age or whatever name you prefer. Here you see the levels of estrogens in premenopause, perhaps still in childbearing age, from the time a woman has her first menstruation until 35 to 45 years of age. In fact, there are women who could begin an early, what we would call early menopause at age 35, but they may begin to notice symptoms before 40, although officially it's considered to be as of age 40. then perimenopause, and the average age as of which menopause appears in women, at least here in Spain, is around 51. But obviously, it could occur before, and it could occur a few years later. And then we would see the post-menopause phase. What happens in perimenopause? The woman's menstrual cycle is like a roller coaster. This cycle, which we've seen at the beginning, which was very well orchestrated with hormones, the hormones that are secreted from the hypophysis and from the ovaries, it's all very well orchestrated when it is running correctly. There are women who have pathologies and it doesn't run properly, but when the woman is healthy, it's well orchestrated and the woman is very regular. I have a 28-day cycle, and I always know when my period is coming. But there are cycles now in perimenopause due to more estrogens. It takes longer, or it occurs before, and that's when we begin the roller coaster of hormones. And it's not just manifested in changes in the menstrual cycle, but in heat flashes, hot flashes, mood swings, bloating in the abdominal area, joint pain, urinary problems, incontinence, vaginal secretions, more vaginal infections. All of these things are triggered by hormonal changes and the diminishment of hormones such as estrogen. Here you see some more of the main sex hormones in women: estradiol, progesterone, and testosterone. Yes, we women have testosterone and we need it. It's important. We don't have it at the same level as men do, but men also have estradiol. They also have estrogens. The levels are different, of course. We should always remember that menopause is not a disease. Menopause is a process. It is a life process. It's another stage in a woman's life, and we must give it the visibility that it requires. And we have to talk about it because we often reach this stage in our lives without having much of an idea of what's going on. It's important that we talk about it. It's important that we visualize it. But it's not a disease, but it does have symptoms. Symptoms we must know to understand what is happening to us and why. It's also important to remember that menopause is more than hot flashes and night sweating. These are the most common symptoms when you talk about menopause. Oh, this woman is menopausal, and you think of a woman having hot flashes with a fan who's hot all the time. It's true that 80% of women who begin menopause can or do have hot flashes. It's a high number. Many of us feel hot flashes, but the percentage of women for whom this conditions their lifestyle because they have hot flashes and night sweating and they can't sleep at night, and this affects your day-to-day, or hot flashes that you have a lot of perspiration and get your clothing wet. This is only around 20%, if I remember correctly. But it's important to remember that it is a phase and that there are ways to mitigate those symptoms. In the case of hot flashes, when hot flashes become a symptom that conditions your quality of life, it's very important to see a doctor, to see a gynecologist, for them to assess you and see if you're a candidate for menopausal hormone therapy. There are many controversies around this hormonal therapy in menopause, but we do know that there are women who are candidates and who can take this and benefit from it during menopause. The risk of cancer, that's the big fear that we all face with hormonal therapy. The risk of cancer is very low with the drugs being used, as long as the woman is a proper candidate, that she not be hormone dependent or have hormone dependent cancer. That's why it's important to see a doctor. or a healthcare professional to determine if you are a candidate. Here you see some of the symptoms that I've already mentioned, those that tend to appear in perimenopause, such as alterations in the menstrual cycle, as I said before, hot flashes and night sweats, changes in the sleep pattern, circadian rhythm, insomnia. A lot of women wake up in the middle of the night having insomnia. There are also impacts on one's emotional well-being and mental health. There are many women who are misdiagnosed with depression, when in fact what is happening to them is that they are in perimenopause with very low hormonal levels, and this causes emotional disturbances in them. These women, if they are candidates, can benefit from hormonal therapy. This helps them to overcome these difficulties that have to do with emotional well-being and mental health. There can also be physical symptoms having to do with things like weight, hair loss, becomes weaker, thinner, changes in skin, the skin becomes thinner, more wrinkles appear, it appears drier, pain in the joints, breasts, muscular tension. These can all be symptoms of perimenopause. Digestion can also be affected. Allergies may appear, or even histamine problems, and the genitourinary syndrome, these disruptions that occur in the genitourinary tract that could lead to urinary incontinence or vaginal dryness. Menopause also has risks. And that's just unfair, because as soon as we stop producing hormones, just for that reason, we see an increase in the risk of pathologies. But it's been shown that estrogens have a protective role in women's health. When we begin menopause, there are high risks of dementia, and this appears to be more present in women than men, and very much related with diabetes, with menopause, with fewer estrogens, with less protection from estrogens. There is a high risk of type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, depression, and cancer. This does not mean that it's a lost cause. Prevention continues to be very important. As I said earlier, the earlier we begin prevention, the better. And if we can do it from our childbearing years, then with osteoporosis, for example, and forms of cancer, CV disease, or diabetes, then diet comes into play, as well as lifestyle, depression, and dementia. That's also true. To avoid stress and remain mentally active, that's all very important. And during menopause, one of the main changes that takes place, and that is of greatest concern to women, the physical changes, the body changes. And this appears to be something of a metamorphosis. And I see a lot of patients and clients who tell me, I just don't recognize myself in the mirror anymore. Or I used to have a certain figure, I was relatively slim, but now I can't fit into my old clothes. I now have a belly or sagging, what have you. But it's not only due to menopause, it's the passage of time as well. It's age. Oftentimes we say menopause causes these bodily changes, but the truth is those bodily changes, the weight gain, which is due to menopause, is only 1 to 3 kilograms. The rest of the weight that a woman puts on is due to age, because we're getting older, and also lifestyle, because our bodies change, and yet we continue to eat as we did before. And if we don't get physical exercise, it becomes more of a problem now. And those are changes that we need to make. As of age 30, we begin to lose around 0.7% of our muscle mass. This loss accelerates in perimenopause as we stop producing estrogens. There's a lack of estrogen, but also testosterone. Testosterone is a hormone that allows us to maintain our muscle mass. This rate of loss of 0.7% reestablishes itself after menopause once we've stopped menstruating. The thing is, this loss of muscle mass of 0.7% occurs in women and men. It's inherent to aging. If you think of these very elderly people, think of how they look and how they are structurally. They don't have muscle mass. They look like a sack of skin and bones. That's what aging does. It makes you lose your muscle mass. That's why it's important to prevent with diet and physical exercise, as we will see. What are the consequences of a loss of muscle mass? On one hand, metabolism gets slower. Muscle mass is the metabolically active tissue that burns fat. If I tell my clients the best way to burn fat is muscle mass, you don't have to be like a bodybuilder. A lot of times, if we talk about weightlifting and things, we think we're going to look like one of those bodybuilders that you see on TV. No, that won't happen. What you have to do to get like that is so much that it's impossible. So let's leave that fear behind and pick up some little weights, none of those big weights, 3 kilograms, for example, and up to increase muscle mass. There's also, when we lose muscle mass, something called insulin resistance. That leads to weight gain through metabolism and higher risk of diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And if we don't have muscle mass, there's a higher risk of falling and osteoporosis. What else happens in menopause? There is a change in our fat distribution pattern. We no longer accumulate fat in the glutei and legs, and it's more in the abdomen. And women begin to look more like men. The women who aren't caring for themselves gain weight in the abdominal area. And that makes women look more like men as they accumulate fat in the abdominal region. We must be very careful because visceral fat could make up to 20% of the entire body's fat. This fat causes changes in a woman's figure. It generates a lot of frustration, and it's a type of fat that's very dangerous because it has a number of risks. It reduces insulin sensitivity. It increases inflammation. It increases triglycerides and cholesterol, leading to fatty liver, increases testosterone and also estrogens, and what's called metabolic syndrome. What happens is that we go from a pear shape in general, a very classical paradigm, but it's easy to understand visually, going from a pear shape to more of an apple shape body. How can we work on our bodily composition or recomposition? I don't like to talk about just weight loss. Oftentimes it is necessary, but I prefer to talk about bodily recomposition by eliminating excess fat and promoting muscle mass. The first thing is common sense. We must know where we're starting from and where we're headed. If you're a woman who has never had any physical activity or exercise, you have to start bit by bit. It's important to have a diet program adapted to you, your circumstances, your risk factors, your symptoms in menopause or perimenopause, and whenever it's possible, to cook at home, because that's more of a guarantee that you will be cooking and eating healthy foods, to avoid ultra-processed food, and to move, to get exercise. The recipe to do bodily recomposition is to get exercise, to gain strength, and a very protein enhanced diet. We must increase the protein content of our diets in this time of our lives. Another important thing to remember is that the best quote-unquote diet, I put it in quotes because I don't like the word diets because it has these connotations of restrictions and something that begins and ends in time. I prefer to talk about dietary changes or dietary guidance. What I give my patients are dietary guidelines, but the best quote-unquote diet is the one that works for you and that you can keep up your entire life. So it's not a diet per se in the traditional sense of I'm starting the diet today and next week I'll finish. It's you will begin to eat healthy today and you will continue to eat healthy throughout your life. So what should your diet be like in perimenopause? As I say, it has to be adapted to the woman, to her energetic level and the situation, without getting into the so-called diet culture and reducing, therefore, the risk of anemia. In perimenopause, with all of these changes that take place in the menstrual cycle, especially in the beginning when it begins to get shorter, as you have a shorter cycle, you menstruate more often and have a higher risk of anemia. So therefore, the diet must reduce the risk of anemia, reduce the risk of osteoporosis, reduce CV diseases, and reduce symptoms such as this depends on each woman, and it will help us reduce the risk of cancer. Now, I'd like to give you a few final ideas to begin to close the presentation to prevent some of these situations. First, to reduce anemia in perimenopause and in childbearing ages as well. It's important to eat foods that are rich in iron and those that are rich in vitamin C, because vitamin C is a nutrient which, as we know, favors the absorption of iron, especially vegetable iron, which is not as easily absorbed as animal origin iron. That's very important in vegetarian or vegan women. Here you see some examples of foods: mollusks, red meat, eggs, legumes, green leaf vegetables, seeds, chia, linen, pumpkin, almonds, dried fruit, cashews. If we eat all of these things and other foods that are rich in vitamin C, we will be favoring the absorption of plant iron. For example, a legume salad, chickpea salad with tomatoes, peppers, a bit of onion, egg. That would be a perfect example. Here you see the legumes and eggs have iron, the tomato and pepper have vitamin C. So in a way, with that combination, it's a winning combination to favor the absorption of iron. For osteoporosis, osteoporosis is a very complex issue because we have understood that bone health depends on calcium, but it also depends on vitamin D. But osteoporosis is a very complex disease, and there are many factors and nutrients that intervene, not just calcium and vitamin D, but also magnesium, potassium, vitamin K, vitamin C, zinc, proteins, and negatively, excessive salt and lifestyle factors that can affect bone health, physical exercise. So getting strength and impact exercise like running and jumping, if you combine them, that's better. That helps strengthen your bones. And smoking is detrimental to bone health. Here are some examples of foodstuffs in the amounts that would be around 250 milligrams of calcium. To give you an idea of how much calcium you're getting, if you want to pay more attention to that, to your intake of this nutrient. But I would advise you, if you do need to get a calcium-rich diet, you also pay attention to the other nutrients that have to do with osteoporosis and that you get help from a professional. To prevent CV diseases and cancer, for now, what we have the most evidence on is the Mediterranean diet, which is very rich in vegetables, in fiber, antioxidants, and phytosterols, with a certain presence of blue fish. Omega-3 is very important. No processed meats, no butter or excessive butter, nor saturated fats or ultra-processed foods, the so-called UPFs, ultra-processed foods. It is low in saturated fats and rich in antioxidants in unsaturated fats, fiber, and other important things. And to reduce the vasomotor symptoms, that is, hot flashes, here, a diet which we find phytoestrogens will help us. Depending on the case, there are some women who even changing their diet won't help them, but others with these phytonutrients, it could work for them. Here is a list of foodstuffs, not just soya. There are many others. Chickpeas, pistachios, sesame, among others. To conclude, in addition to the importance of paying attention to all of the life stages in a woman's life and taking into account all the special nutritional needs that we have during those stages, it's important for us to remember that in this final stage, the final physiological changes of the woman, the climaterium, is a very important life stage that we will all go through, and we should know it. Every woman will live through it differently. Every woman will live through a different transition to and through menopause. It's important to know the symptoms and to listen to our bodies. The first treatment, first line treatment is always lifestyle. That has to do, and we must pay attention to our diet, to our physical activity, to the management of stress, our sleep patterns, and social relations. Because if we speak to other women, and not just other women, but men as well, your partner, your husbands and boyfriends, it's important that they know what is happening to us, our children, our parents, our friends. It's important that the entire society realize that this is a very important stage for women. We have to give it a higher profile and attach more value to it. And if the symptoms are severe and lifestyle changes are not enough, then you need to see a professional, physician, for the possibility of hormonal therapy for menopause. To conclude, going back to that idea of metamorphosis, those changes that take place in the body, and that can be so frustrating. I think that menopause is a process that can be an opportunity for women. We have a lot of experience. We know a lot about life, and it's important to take better care of ourselves, to love ourselves more, and become butterflies after the metamorphosis. Thank you for your attention. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and I think we still have a couple minutes if you have any questions or remarks for me. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Raquel.
Thank you, Raquel.
Nos quedamos con esta frase.
We will definitely
Ha quedado
remember
muy bien.
your parting words there.
Sí que veo que por el chat
It's a very
hay alguna
nice idea.
pregunta por aquí.
We do have a couple questions in the
La
chat,
primera
so
pregunta es de
let's start off with
comenta
Mireille's
si es
question.
compatible una dieta saludable en la menopausia y
Is a
una dieta
healthy
baja en proteína de origen animal.
diet in menopause, a healthy diet compatible with a low animal protein diet? Absolutely. I have vegetarian clients. It's true that one important point in diet during menopause is the risk of insulin resistance, which ends up appearing. Insulin resistance, to sum it up, means that our body cannot manage carbohydrates as well. And since it doesn't manage carbohydrates as well, that glucose in blood, the glucose remains there. We can't use it, quote unquote, use it, and it becomes fat, which is usually accumulated in the abdominal region. If we have more of a vegetarian or vegan diet, we get protein from legumes. And they also bring us hydrocarbon. But there are protein-rich foods that are low in carbohydrates. pasteurized vegetable protein, seitan, for example. So there are options. It's possible, and it is compatible. Thank you. And does can the period be stabilized with a different hormonal level? Can this period be stabilized with a different hormonal level? I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me say that once menopause is over, the hormonal levels, each woman's going to live this in a different way, live through this in a different way. But we can have menopause, no longer have menstruation, but still have symptoms. Once menstruation ends, your hormonal levels are going to be very low. And so those levels are low and stable. It would be a matter of, in case of symptoms, to treat them at that time. What would be the nutritional plan in case of endometriosis? Endometriosis is, in dietary terms, polycystic ovary syndrome can be resolved with diet, but endometriosis is more complex. An anti-inflammatory diet can help in the case of endometriosis because this inflammation takes place. And let's remember that low-level inflammation also occurs in menopause. So the type of diet must always be anti-inflammatory in menopause. That would be the plan for me, an anti-inflammatory diet. Okay. What about at the practical level? Do hot flashes ever end? They do end, but we just don't know when. There are women who continue to have them in post-menopause, unfortunately. There's no one standard about that. Every woman is different and will live through that in a different way. What about intermittent fasting? Can that help stabilize us hormonally? I am not aware of the effect of intermittent fasting on sex hormones, which are the ones that we are interested in when it comes to discussing childbearing years and menopause years. It is true that intermittent fasting can be useful for certain women who may have insulin deficiency and who need to control their insulin levels better. Insulin is a hormone after all, so you have to see what hormones we're discussing and what the needs that this woman has when it comes to using intermittent fasting or not. At the end of the day, intermittent fasting, it's more important that we leave some space between meals. That is, trying not to snack between meals and have a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and good nighttime fasting for 12 hours, more than getting into this obsession of 16 hours without eating or what have you. It's the other way is more physiological, but there are options and you have to see what's right for you in each case. Okay. Another question following up on what you said about the anti-inflammatory diet. Could you describe that a bit more? What is an anti-inflammatory diet? The Mediterranean diet has an anti-inflammatory profile. It's very rich in fiber, in antioxidants, in omega-3, in cruciferous foods, such as cabbage, broccoli, with compounds that have shown themselves to reduce cancer risk. It's a kind of diet rich in vegetables, rich in healthy fats, rich in proteins. As we said before, we talk about anti-inflammatory diet, but it's basically just a healthy Mediterranean diet. It already has that component. But since our diet is becoming so misadjusted with saturated fats and sugar, that's what causes low-level inflammation. When you get rid of that and we eat right, we call it anti-inflammatory. But the truth is, we're not really using the term correctly, because a healthy diet is not pro-inflammatory. That perhaps that would be a better way to put it.
Una pregunta de Adriana Storak.
Adriana Storak asks, is it true? You know, people tend to ask more questions as we're finishing. But is it true that salvia helps mitigate hot flashes? Can we always take it? Is it recommended? There are women for whom this works. Phytotherapy, I haven't spoken about this because I didn't want to go on at too much length, but in phytotherapy, there are some plants that are proving to be helpful for some women, such as saffron, salvia, quinoa, another plant, which appears to work very well for hot flashes. And the thing is, phytotherapy doesn't have that many scientific studies behind it, as it could be the case with drugs. We need more information to make general recommendations. What I usually recommend with phytotherapy is always, if you're going to do phytotherapy, to get guidance from a professional. Although they are natural products, there can be interactions with drugs. If you're taking any drugs, there can be side effects. You have to see what your clinical history is, what kind of supplements can work for you, and then to test them. And if they don't work properly, keep trying until you find the right one. But since we don't have too many studies, we can't generalize a guideline for everyone, as would be the case with standard drugs, for example. Well, Raquel, I don't know if you have any final remarks or give us some contact info or a website. Yes, you can find me at my website, raquelbernacer.com. You can see how I work and get information on the courses that I give. I'm also on Instagram, Raquel.Bernácer, and there I talk about menopause, I talk about diet, and I try to give recommendations for women to take better care of themselves during that time of their lives. Very well. We will end it here. Thank you for that interesting presentation, and thanks for coming along with us tonight and sharing this information with you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you. We'll see you next time. Thank you.